to the Inside Digital Transformation podcast. Inside Digital Transformation explores how organizations of every size and shape are using technology today to survive and thrive in the face of relentless change. If you are a business or technology leader charged with making the most of digital transformation in your organization, then this podcast is for you. And now here's your host, Alan Bernard, a technology journalist, editor, and copywriter who has been covering the intersection of business and technology for over 2 decades.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm speaking with Ulf Persson, the CEO of the intelligent document processing company ABBYY, about what it takes to lead digital transformation from the top down. Digital transformation today involves the bottom-up adoption of scalable new technologies, but it also requires top-down leadership to ensure that the technologies being introduced will integrate properly with existing systems, all while furthering the organization's goals. Ultimately, it is the job of the CEO to set the vision that informs those goals and gives decision makers the frameworks they need to make better technology decisions faster. Okay, Ulf, thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
So I'd like to start off the call today with your definition of digital transformation, because it really is so different. Right. I mean, you sit at the head of a technology company. Somebody else might be head of a manufacturing outfit. Somebody else is implementing IT in a restaurant chain. And so you all face different headwinds, different challenges, different levels of maturity. So as you go through your day, is there a definition of digital transformation that you try to keep in the fore as you make decisions around technology?
It's a good question, and I think you will probably get different answers from everyone you ask that question. If we try and keep it simple, I think it's in the name, digital and transformation. I think it's all about changes in how companies interact with their customers, but also interact internally with their employees. And using digital technology or new technology to automate and improve processes and experience for both the customers and their employees. Now, you want to do that for one or of 2 reasons. One is, of course, to drive customer satisfaction and adoption and ultimately revenue. But you also want to do it because you want to make your own internal processes more effective and perhaps less labor intensive.
I have one that I throw out in every podcast. It's using digital technologies to change the status quo.
I think that's absolutely true.
Okay.
And changing the status quo, I think if you look at it, there is a bit of an inflection point that we are in the midst of right now, in the sense that I think most enterprise or banks or governmental organizations have developed over time how they run their processes or how they build something or how they interact with their customers. But with the advent of advanced technologies, particularly around machine learning and intelligent automation and AI, you've sort of turbocharged that ability to transform, well, as you say, digitally transform. And I think that is really at the heart of what we're going to talk about today, because it also presents a lot of problems and questions in that you have the tools to do things, but you're not necessarily always applying those tools in the right manner or even at the right time. Technology allows us to do so much more now than 20 years ago or 30 years ago, which means that the opportunities are boundless in terms of how we can improve processes vis-a-vis our customers or vis-a-vis our staff. But just the fact that we can do it doesn't necessarily mean that we should do it or in that particular order. So I think it's incredibly important to understand what it is. Why are you doing a certain thing? If you want to transform a process digitally, as you described, why do you do it? For what purpose are you doing it? And what does success look like? And what are your success criteria?
So how do you make those decisions? Well, what are the criteria that you look for as the CEO of ABBYY that points you in one direction or another?
Well, I think you have to have a problem that you're trying to solve. Something is not working as well as you think it should be working, or something that you see can leave a lot of room for improvement. And I think, again, coming back to the 2 areas of customer interaction and seeking internal efficiencies. Now, if you are a a CEO or a C-level manager in any company, you will have a number of different processes that are not working as well as you'd like them to do, and you're also seeing a number of different opportunities on how you can improve your customer success and your customer experience. I think the important thing is then to determine, so where do I get the biggest bang for my buck? Where can I successfully transform a process with the help of digital technologies and getting a payoff for it? And not only I'm getting a payoff for it, but I'm getting or payback, but I'm actually seeing increased customer or improved customer sentiment, or increased customer onboarding, or whatever it is you're automating, whatever it is you're measuring. So I think it's incredibly important to determine what are the success factors, and then go after that. I also think that you can't do everything at once. I think you need to understand that let's focus on some core processes. If it's about process automation, do that, evaluate, learn, and take the next steps.
How do you define that criteria? So how do you define what payback is? Right. The big picture, top line growth, bottom line savings, right?
Well, it depends on what it is. Right? It depends entirely on what it is. I mean, there are certain, if you are, for example, automating or improving with the help of digital tools, a support process or a back-end process, what is your success criteria then? Well, it is how well does the customer feel that it's been served? I mean, we've all ended up in the phone queues where we're talking to digital assistants, where we're just not getting anywhere. Now, that may, from a technical point of view, have been a fantastically an excellent implementation, but it doesn't make your customers happier. And on the contrary, it can really get to a big backlash if you are losing a customer because you don't have that human touch. So again, I think it depends on what is it you're trying to do. And based on what you're trying to do, you need to determine the success criteria. At any stage when you go for this process improvement and digitization of a process, there's also a risk that you need to take into account, that you create, you run into unintended consequences. So that's what you have to solve.
Right. There's always trade-offs.
Yeah.
So interesting. You mentioned it has to work. What my thought there was, does it actually have to be better than the existing process in some way or other, or does it just have to meet a need, a customer demand, say for, since we're using the bank example, to be able to have an app, right? Mm-hmm. Even though on the back end, that app just feeds right into your legacy mainframe, the existing processes, right? So from the bank's point of view, it really isn't a change necessarily, but from the user point of view, it's a big change.
Yes.
But it's a massive investment to make that work securely, to make sure, right, that all those steps, all the regulatory steps are in place, right?
Right.
That's a big investment. Is it necessarily an improvement from the business's point of view?
No, I think it is an improvement because if you were a bank today and you didn't offer these digital services to your customers, you wouldn't remain in business because everyone else is doing it. And if you look at the modern banks of fintech companies that started out as technology companies and became banks, there's quite a few of them. They started from the digital side directly, so they don't even have a branch office. There's no bank to go to, and I think that's in terms of banking, that's really setting the agenda today. And you will always have these sort of technology will allow disruptive behavior. I don't think technology itself is necessarily disruptive, but it'll allow for disruptive behavior or disruptive breakthroughs on the part of a company, and that will then redefine how the whole industry are doing things. And we've seen that time and time again. And we will always see it.
Sure.
And in terms of banking, I think that's exactly the case. Interestingly, I had a conversation with the CIO of one of the leading European banks. This is already a couple of years ago, but I remember it very vividly because he said a lot of people think that we as banks are really, really well run in terms of how we automate our internal processes, because they see how relatively good we are faring with customer interaction. with the help of apps, and then you can transfer, you can pay, and whatever. But if you then go into the business systems that we're using in the bank, it's a bit of a ragbag of different systems. Some of them are very old. You may have had consolidations or an acquisition or a merger with other banks, or even if you didn't, different regional banks or national structures, substructures have had their own systems. So it's very difficult to have one. Very few banks, I would imagine, have that a standard set of business systems that is then run in the same way across all their offices and all their legal entities.
Sure.
So I think that comes to your point, is that it may look very good from the outside, but from the inside, there's still a lot of work to do. And this brings me to another thought, that we are only at the very beginning of this sort of digital transformation. This will be scratching the surface. This will be a very topical area for decades to come.
Right. Yeah, I remember when I started I hate to admit it, over 20 years ago, writing about this stuff, it was really about streamlining operations, right? Improving processes. Remember the expression garbage in, garbage out? You don't hear that much anymore. Where today, I think the user seems to be front and center in the decision-making process, which kind of leads me to my next question, was taking the bank example a little further, the heterogeneous nature of IT, right? That you have all these different systems you've inherited in M&A, right? Through mergers and acquisitions, and et cetera, or just done through best of breed, right? Which is how a lot of decision-making has been done over the years.
Right.
Because there weren't platforms, for example, to use. Cloud didn't exist, right? And so you have this hybrid, these chimera type environments. So from a leadership position, right? Because again, taking this back to leadership, what do you focus on in that instance? Because your competition is doing it. So you have to do something to keep up, right? With the digital first, FinServes, right? But your back end needs help. So at what point, how do you make the decisions on where to apply resources? Because it seems to me you kind of have to do both at the same time, perhaps. Is that?
Yeah, if I understand your question correctly, where would an enterprise put the more focus? Is it on the business side or the back end side?
Exactly. Where do you decide to place the focus?
I think it's probably both. But if you compare today with maybe even 5-10 years ago, it was much more. If you were the head of IT, you effectively ran the show in terms of business systems, not only in terms of procurement, but also in running it and setting the requirements. I think that has changed dramatically. So you now are much more looking at business centers of excellence who are determining what they actually need, and with the advent of SaaS platforms, you can actually try something on at a fairly low cost and even ring fence it and say this, define the success criteria and start trying it out for 3 months or 6 months, and you don't have to make a lifelong investment decision, which I think is great. So I think that balance has definitely shifted in favor of business. But having said that, as you correctly pointed out, any enterprise will need, including us, as we are more like enablers in terms of intelligent automation. But even if I look at our own company, there's only so many systems we want to engage with, because they all need some support, and they all need to be used in order for you to get the return on that investment. So even if it's a SaaS platform, it costs money, and it costs money on a monthly basis, on quarterly or annual basis. So you need to use it. So I think there needs to be a strong control function. I think there needs to be a strong centralized information technology or digital transformation strategy, which I think definitely involves some sort of IT services or IT group. But it goes beyond that. I think it's also a C-level question, whether that sits with your CTO or CMO or the CEO or chief operating officer. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that it's a combination of C-level a center of excellence or IT, and it's the business units and the operations. So between the three, there is guidance, there's usage, there's budgets, of course, there's procurement, there's service and support internally. And I think each company needs to find the solution that they're working best for them. We have one of our bigger clients or customers. They have a system where the business units will set up the requirements and determine what they need to do, but then you have a more centralized IT function that will look at, okay, how do we best procure this, and how does that fit in with our overall IT infrastructure or digital investment infrastructure planning. So it is, I think at the minimum you can see these two approaches, which sometimes are conflicting, because the business unit will typically want something quicker. They want time to value, whereas the broader IT will have to look at, well, what is happening a year from now, 2 years from 3 years from now? How is this system, if it may be a best of breed system, how is that going to fit in with our overall platform strategy?
Right. Yeah, it's technical debt, right?
Yeah.
So how is it going to impact our ability to make these decisions in 5 years?
Right.
So, okay. So this is actually a nice segue into actually kind of the first question of our list here. And that is, why does leadership matter in these instances, right? Because as the CEO, you are sitting at the top of that pyramid. Mm. And so I think at the end of the day, I mean, the buck really does stop with you, as the expression goes. And these decisions, ultimately the big ones, right? Not what ERP package do we need or what CRM are we going to, it's do we do it? Do we go that direction? Rest with you, correctly? Correct?
No, I think it does, but ultimately it does. But I think any modern enterprise will have a setup where these decisions are being, prepared and analyzed and then ultimately proposed by those who know best in that specific area. So I think what we need to do as a leadership team is to make sure that what the left hand does makes sense for the right hand, and that it all sort of hangs together. So if we are making an investment in whether it's in a marketing platform, that platform needs to be able to talk to a financial platform, which in turn needs to be able to talk to, of course, Salesforce, etc. So, when it comes to building out your infrastructure, as I said in my previous reply, is that it has to make sense both for the BU user and an individual and for the company as a whole. And if we look at the bigger company, that of course becomes even more complicated, because you may have large operations in Asia, which differ quite substantially from operations in Europe or in the United States. But if you want to run it properly and build and climb up that learning curve and use the business systems as well as possible, then you need coordination. There's no doubt. Training is part of it, but coordination.
So as the CEO, do you need to understand the technologies in order to decide or make an informed decision? And by understand, I mean, you just need to know that, yes, this will integrate with our existing systems, and then you trust your plus ones, right, to make those decisions, and then... Well,
isn't that always the case? You have to build, if you're a leader, you have to build the best possible team around you that can augment your strengths and take care of your weaknesses. So no one can know everything. I do think, however, that today's CEOs probably has to be a little bit more tech savvy than 20 years ago. But I also think that comes fairly naturally. If you look at most people in their 30s and the 40s, they've grown up with with mobile technology and with the internet and it comes fairly natural. It's probably more difficult for the older generation. So the answer, I think, is yes. I think you do need to know a little bit more. At the same time, I think you shouldn't focus too much about on the technology itself. You need to focus on the outcome. As I said, it's a couple of years ago, when everyone was talking about ML and AI will sort of solve everything, it was an incoherent set of statements, in my view, in that we should start from the other end. What is the problem that we're trying to solve, and can we, with the help of modern technologies, AI approaches or machine learning technologies, can we help solve that particular problem? And I think that's more the question that you as a leader have to ask yourself. How can I and how can the company perform our services to our customers in a better way or more cost-effective way than we've done in the past, or than we're doing right now, with the help of new capabilities or technologies, rather than how can I make these technologies work for me? It doesn't start with the technology. Technology is a means to an end.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are you familiar with design thinking?
Yes.
Okay. Is it along those lines?
No, I think so. I think you start thinking, so what am I solving for? What is the problem I'm trying to solve here? And how can I apply? And typically, it's not, technology is part of the solution. It's more often a management or process solution. Right people in the right places, running the right processes with as much software support or technical support as the technology support as they can. But if you don't have control over your financial processes, any ERP will be difficult to implement. Or if you don't have your sales processes in control, making the best possible use of Salesforce is going to be difficult. So I do think that it starts with humans, and it starts with designing the right processes. It starts with trying to figure out what is it you're trying to solve for. Without the right people and right processes, technologies become irrelevant. But with the right processes and the right people, then the question of how much do I invest, what do I invest in, what am I solving for, what is the expectation, becomes very important. And that is to some extent a quite technical decision once you're there.
All right. So I want to get back to the vision question. How do you set a vision that encompasses technology, but also people and process and your customers, and so many considerations go into that one statement. What are the kind of the mechanics behind doing that?
Well, I think in most markets today, and certainly markets where you provide technology or you're a big user of technology, they are fiercely competitive. So I told you about where we come from, the OCR and capture market. Not hugely competitive. There were a couple of dominant companies, number of smaller companies, but it wasn't a market that attracted a lot of newcomers. With the market for intelligent automation, of which IDP, document processing, is a part, the process mining is a part, RPA is a part, that is fiercely competitive. So if I look at our competitive landscape right now, it's the big technology companies like Microsoft and Amazon. It's the RPA vendors themselves. It's the traditional capture companies. It's relatively new startups that have abounded and done well over the last 3-4 years. Lots of funding around. So, what does that tell you? Well, it tells you, number one, you're in an interesting place, because otherwise there wouldn't be so much money invested into competing in that place or space. But it also tells you that you need to focus. And you need to be very, very clear yourself about what do you want to be to whom, for whom. So who are my competitors? Who are my customers? What problem am I solving for those customers? And then you laser focus on that. There will always be a lot of opportunities to do a bit more because the customers will want it, or a bit more because you can see the opportunity. And whilst you should keep your mind open, of course, it is I think super, super important that you keep your focus, because if you deviate from that focus, and you're not the best or the best you can be in what you're doing, you'll be eaten by your competitors. And that's something that you just have to determine. And then that's how you manage everything you do, your investment in R&D, your marketing, messaging and investment in marketing, how you set up your sales force. But it's also have to be constantly reiterated and repeated, so that the whole team understands that this is our North Star, this is where we're going, and why we're going in this direction. Sometimes that means saying no to customers, which is extremely difficult. Sometimes it means saying no to investment proposals from inside the company, from people that you really trust and like, and say, because it deviates a little bit from our focus and our strategy, and might be an extremely good idea in and of itself, but it has to be accretive to our own business strategy.
Okay, so how do you know you're right?
You don't.
Okay, so how do you? Okay, so how do you manage
you don't
that
know
uncertainty?
That you're right.
How do you manage that?
Look, I'm exaggerating, of course. I think for me, there's sort of three ways. One is you analyze before decisions. So you take on as much information as you can, and you talk to a lot of people, and you read up, and you talk to your customers if that's applicable. So you inform yourself. Secondly, as I said before, I think you need to trust people with the best proximity to the problem or the question or the solution, to come up with the right proposals or the right recommendations. And then thirdly, I think in some cases you just have to go with your gut feeling. And if this is what you think as a leader of a company is right, and sometimes that goes in the face of what other people are thinking, but you are convinced yourself based on information and your own internal belief, then I think you stand behind it. And the other thing, of course, is how do you manage a leadership team or an organization? I think it should be very open, very transparent. The decisions that you're making, should stay away from secrecy. You should also listen to everyone, and everyone needs to understand that my thoughts and my input are highly valued. But there's also a situation where you say, okay, we now have to make a decision, and it may very well be that decision is not unanimous, and then you also need to make sure that everyone is pulling in behind that decision, although they perhaps wouldn't have voted for it or didn't vote for it or didn't vie for it, because that's how it works. Someone has to make the decision ultimately, and then the rest of the team needs to get in behind and do the best we can do. Now, you asked, how do you know you're right? Well, you don't know you're right until you see that it's working, and sometimes it's not working. And rather than doubling down, evaluate again. And if the best thing is to fail, then fail fast, and make sure that you go another direction, or you correct your decision one way or the other. So I think that's also very important. I
think that's still difficult, right? For most people, which means most organizations.
Yeah, but isn't that also why you want a broad church? You want people to really question, when there's something to be questioned, people should feel free to question. And it may very well be that I am wrong or someone else is wrong, and we need to be able to call them out and say, look, are you really sure about this? Shall we have another look at this, without feeling threatened about it? And I think that's super important in a modern organization.
And that's a leadership function.
It is.
Okay.
I don't think the role of the leader is to know everything better than anyone else. I think the role of the leader is to channel the best possible decisions, using all the know-how that you have in the organization, and not least in your own leadership team.
Right. And to know what you don't know.
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah,
a big
exactly.
one. And right. Well, so I made a note here to myself that while you were talking, you hear a lot about data-driven decision making, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, at the end of the day, the data doesn't make the decision, you do. And so, because you mentioned making a gut call, well,
Yeah.
it seems to me you do your best to amass the data, get the best information you can, but at some point that stops and you just have to make a decision.
Yeah,
right?
but it's good that you brought it up, because when I said before, you inform yourself as best you can, and frankly, we didn't talk about that, but what is possible today with the help of all kinds of technologies, there's something called telemetry, which basically means you can have an inside look at how your customer is using your products or your software, and based on that, you can draw conclusions on what needs to be changed, improved, or what's not really working, or what the customer feels is important. It could be new features. So I think today, when in the SaaS model, of course, it's so overridingly important that you listen to your customer and you make sure that your customers are happy, because otherwise they'll go somewhere else and they'll churn or they'll downsell. So the more you understand and the more data-driven you can be in that respect, because if your customers tell you a consistent story that this is missing or this is not as good, it doesn't matter what you think. That's really the verdict, and that's what you follow. So I think data-driven decisions are incredibly important, but it doesn't entirely, of course, replace the fact that you sometimes have to make other decisions. I mean, look, if you look at the grand visionaries of the world, they make decisions that cannot be based on data because they're looking into the future.
Do you feel it's more challenging today to be a leader than it has been in the past? And pick a reason. I mean, obviously, we're talking about digital transformation, but do you find it more challenging today than it has been?
Look, it's a good question. I think in one way it is, and that is that everything happens at a higher pace today than it did maybe 10 or 20 years ago. At the same time, so in that respect, everything happens so fast. It means that you can't procrastinate, you can't dwell on something, you can't not make decisions. You have to be sometimes quite ruthless and get things done. And you can't sort of rest on your laurels. You're not as you're just as good as your next win. What happened a year ago, 2 years ago, doesn't count. So I think the velocity of change has definitely made it more difficult to be a leader at any level. On the other hand, I think we today have access to so much more information. And again, information is great, it's good, but you have to also make sure that you choose the information that
you have to make sure it's good information, right?
Because otherwise, in order to be good information, the right information, it needs to be the right amount of information, because otherwise you drown. But having said that, I think there is more information. We talked about getting customer data or usage data that you didn't have before, and that makes it a little bit easier. You can make more customer or data-driven decisions than you could some time ago.
So yes and no. And again, it's going to come down to what decision you're making about what in what time frame and what factors go into it, et cetera, et cetera.
And I think on balance, it's more difficult in the sense that everything is so much more competitive, and the velocity of business development is, the whole funding environment and everything. It's different, but it's a good challenge. It keeps us on our toes.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time, I think, I don't know when, I'm not a historian on this, but where you could come up with a good idea and run that idea for 50 years and fundamentally not change what you do and be highly successful, right? Mm-hmm. But those times seem to be over.
Yeah, definitely when you come to technology, when it comes to technology, that's for sure. That's for sure.
Okay. Do you think, have we missed anything that you'd like to bring up?
No, I think it's been a nice conversation. I hope we covered useful areas and points to the listeners as well. So no, I think it's good.
All right, good. All right. Well, Ulf, thank you very much. I very much appreciate your time today.
No, thanks very much, Alan. I appreciate it too. Thank you.
If you liked this episode, please tell your friends and check out our other shows. You can find Inside DT on all the major hosting platforms, including Apple, Amazon, Spotify, and Google. Talk to you soon.